Hello, I'm Robert, and you're welcome here in my busy little shop. On today's episode of What's on My Workbench, it's going to be leather, and it's going to be some wide leather. I am going to be making a cartridge belt that is bigger than any that I've done in the past. A lot of the cartridge belts I've done before, you can put through the loops. Now, one of them was for a 41 mag, and the rounds are pretty good size, so it's not easy to fit through the loops, but you could make it work. Well, this one here, the cartridges are about 2.5 inches long, so we're going to need a belt strap that's going to be 3 inches. Plus, the gentleman that I'm making this for, I feel blessed to have some great viewers out there that come up with things for me to make, and that's where this came from. Jerry asked me to make this cartridge belt for him, and he told me, you know, I want you to use whatever you want to on the art side of making this. So I'm going to take this to another level so it's wider, and we're going to age it and make it look like it's been around for a bit. So I appreciate having you in the shop with me today. We'll get over here on the workbench. I'm going to go ahead and cut the straps of leather that we're going to start with, and then I'll meet you over on the workbench. I really do appreciate you taking time to be with me in the shop today. All right, so to get started, I have cut out some leather here. Man, that is some leather. If you're not familiar with the 4570 round, the 4570 round is 2.5 inches long. So that gives us about 5/16 of an inch on either side of the round when it's in there. Now the cartridge strap, which is what I've got here, that's going to get sewn onto there to make the loops, I've cut that at 1.5 inches. And this is not a 4570 shell, but this shell here is, this is 41, so a 45 is going to be bigger than a 41. A 4570 is about 1/2 inch, and we're sitting at 9/16, so about a 1/16 of an inch wider there. Now, in order for the leather to go around that cartridge, we're going to need about 1 1/8 inches of leather to make the loop and get back to the belt. Then I want to have, I'm doing a little bit different here, but I want to have about 3/8 of an inch between each cartridge loop. So there's going to be a lot extra sewing because it'll be sewn and then sewn again and then over the next cartridge. I'm doing that for a couple reasons. One is the design of this belt is to hold 20 rounds. 20 rounds of 4570 is heavy, so I don't want to have all that weight in one stretch, say, across the back of the belt. I want to move that weight around a little bit more, get more onto the hips on this. And it's a pretty good size belt, so we've got plenty of leather to work with as far as the length. So the other thing is the cartridge itself is the shell on a 4570. So it's 45 in caliber, and 70 is the grains of powder that go into it. And the cartridge shell itself is, if I'm not mistaken, it's right at 2 inches long. We're at a little more than 1.25 inches here. So it's going to be 2 inches long. And so I went with 1.5 inches so that we would have a 1/2 inch of brass below the strap. So the below the strap, I guess if I put it that way, we're going to be something similar to that, and then a 1/2 inch projectile out of the bottom of the shell. So it's going to make a cool looking belt. So I'm going through all this to kind of explain a little bit on the dimensions. So this cartridge strap is 1.5 inches wide. That'll leave about a 1/2 inch of brass showing below that. The belt is almost 3.25 wide. I've got it cut at 3 3/16. And the idea is that when the rounds are in here, there'll be an equal amount above here and below the projectile of leather. All right, so that's enough about the cartridge strap. The next thing we're going to have is on this belt, we're going to have, it's going to be made like a ranger belt. In other words, there'll be a strap of leather here that will have a finished point on it with the holes, and then a matching buckle on the other side. So this larger piece of leather here will bypass behind the other one and then come up through the buckle. So I guess when we get to the buckle end of it there, we can talk more about that. And you know what I'll do is at the beginning, I'm going to show what we're building before we get started on here. Now, the next thing that we want to do is, that is a very old cartridge. They still make the cartridge, but it was first developed, I think, in like, I'm going to guess, like 1873, somewhere around there. So what we don't want is, we don't want a brand new looking leather belt. He wants it to be aged a little bit. So we're going to do a few things during the dyeing process to give it some aged look, and then we're going to lightly abuse it a little bit once we get it dyed and before we get our final finishes on there, so that we have more of that look. So the first thing we're going to do, let me set up over on my oil and dye table, and I'm going to show you what we're going to do. I'm over here on my oiling table, and I think I've said before, I use cardboard here to kind of control that so I don't make as much of a mess and get oil where I don't want it. So I tested this piece here, and this is probably a very unorthodox approach, but I'm looking for some blotchiness to this. And I went ahead and I applied oil here, none here, and then I didn't let it dry very long, and I ran it through the dye so I could see what it's going to get. Now, I want some of this here, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to probably focus on oiling kind of through the middle and leave it a little bit dry along the edges so that I can get that unevenness there. So that's my goal. So it's kind of an unorthodox approach, because typically you're going to oil it, get it as even as you can, let it soak in, and that'll help it even out as well. But we're not going to go through this step. So let's see here how this goes. I guess this may have been a good time to find some of my leather that had, you know, maybe some scars on it and such, because that would help do that. But I didn't think about doing that when I first went through my leather supply looking for what I was going to use on this project. All right, I'm just going to give it like just 3 or 4 minutes, and then I'll run it through the dye. Tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm just going to put it through a dye bath, let it dry, and then we'll come back and see what it looks like. Okay, now that the dye has dried on these elements of the project, I'm going to go ahead and seal these with Tan-Kote. This is probably a little bit ahead of when most people would probably think about doing it, and I typically wait. But this strap here will be doubled up, and this will be the narrow part, the buckle part of this belt, which is going to be made in the style of a Ranger belt. And I'm not going to seal the back. They'll be laminated together here. And then this strap here will be my cartridge loop, and it's going to be sewn and formed into the loop, so it's easier to get a coat on here now. And then this is the main body of the belt that the cartridge loops are going to go onto. And if I don't seal it now, it's going to be difficult to get it sealed around there very well. So I'm going to go ahead and seal these parts now. And like I said, I'm going to use Tan-Kote here. And I decided to use Tan-Kote because I'm not going to have to worry about color rub off, because the part that's going to be on the inside against the body, I'm going to leave that raw. And we're going to talk a little bit about that when I get to that part, but it's a little bit of a departure from how I've typically made these, and I wanted to go over it and explain why. And so let me just get this coat of Tan-Kote on here. And you can see there's some, let's call it weathered look to the strap here, and that is by design, because if you remember, we're trying to make something that looks old, and I'm actually going to be taking some sandpaper to the belt when it's done and scuff some areas on it as well. So that's kind of a first for me to kind of antique it a little bit, but he doesn't want it to look like it's brand new when I'm done. So that's the reason why I've gone through some of the steps that I have. The nice thing about using Tan-Kote is you can oil and care for your leather product through the Tan-Kote. It will allow you to oil it, unlike Resin that seals it too much to allow it to do that. Let me hang this up and let this dry. So this is the main body of the belt, and this is the buckle that my client picked for the commission belt. And I think it's going to go really nice. I like this clip corner. I like the center bar. I think that's going to look really pretty cool with the overall look of it. This is one case where the buckle is going to be different color than some of the other features on the belt. But Jerry said he could like the idea of it looking like an old belt with a new buckle. So on a Ranger belt, the non-buckle end of the belt, the one that has the adjustment holes, it tucks underneath the other piece of leather. And I've done some figuring, and I've used numbers that I've had in the past for a Ranger belt, and I believe I need to cut the strap to this length here. Now, one of the last things I'm going to be doing on this, other than melting the belt, is going to be doing my edge stitching. So I'm able to finalize the length of this belt as I need to. So I'm going to go ahead and cut here at this length. This represents 10 inches longer, just like on a regular belt. On a Ranger, it's slightly shorter than that, but like I said, I'll cut it to finished length when I'm done. And this piece of leather, I'll end up using a couple of wide strips here to make my keeper loops for the belt, and I'll show you that in a little bit. So now that I know the overall length of my belt, the next thing I need to do is I need to find center between the adjustment hole we're going to use on the adjustment end of it and the buckle there. And that's what this mark here is. This is dead center on that belt. So this is the piece that I made, and I'm going to make some slight adjustments to this. But the reason why I'm bringing this up now is the specifications for this belt is for it to hold 20 cartridges, which is a box of cartridges. So that means that I need to center the center of the cartridge loops on the center of the back of the belt. So in this case, there's 5. If I was going to center it here, I would center this cartridge on the center. But what I'll end up doing is it'll go between cartridges, and I'll have 10 on each direction from here. And it may seem like I'm really picking it apart, but I want it to be balanced on the person. I don't want to have more cartridges on one side than the other. Now, obviously, depending on what loop he's wearing it in, it could move that slightly, but once again, it's not going through loops on pants, so you can futz a little bit with that, but I'm making it center according to the size that the customer ordered. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start here on this, and I'm going to measure out, and I'm going to lay out both directions here to create the stitching holes for my cartridge loops. And I'm going to start right here. Okay, so to make this work, what I need to do is I need to identify the placement of the cartridge here, top to bottom. We are 3 3/16 total width, and the cartridge is 2.5 inches, so that is going to be slightly less than 3/8 of an inch on both sides. And I'm going to go ahead and find 3/8 here. There's 3/8, and I'm just going to come in, I guess, about a 32nd of an inch from that. That will be where the top of the cartridge leather loop is going to be from the top. So in this case, it's less than that, but I'll put a scribe through here, and that'll be where this needs to go. Now that's important because the way I'm going to stitch this is I'm going to have one stitch over the top. So if I mark here, there, that will be where that leather strap goes. We're imagining that this is the leather strap for the cartridge loops. I want it there. That means that my hole for the stitching needs to be slightly less than that so that it's in the right spot. So I'm going to go ahead and come in another 30 seconds. So instead of 3/8, we're going to be, let me think about that. We're going to be 5/16 of an inch along the top here. Here's the center. So I'm going to put that line along the top. Let me make sure here. I marked the top on the inside here so I wouldn't get confused. And I'm going to start here. I'm just going to put a light scribe here. This will be the area that I follow for the top of the stitching chisel marks. All right. So next, I need to lay out my pattern on here. So I'm just lining up. So I'm just lining up here on my center, and I'll mark both sides of this. That will be where my first stitching line goes there. And then we want 11/16 of an inch between there. So that's the first cartridge on that side and the first cartridge on this side. And now the other side of each of these stitching patterns. And I'm just going to work this way out till I have 10 spots on each side for my stitching. There's probably somebody out there saying there's a lot of easier way to figure this out. But for me, when I'm making what I would call a one-off project, this is how I go about figuring it out. And if I was making a bunch of these, then I'm sure I would come up with a quicker way of doing it. But this is how I end up creating it on, you know, a one-off custom piece. And I think some people are like, why does a custom piece, you know, become so expensive? And it's because you have to do this. And I figure at the same time, I run the risk of needing to start over because I've made a mistake. And so I kind of figure a little bit of that in there as well. 1, 2, 3, 9. So one more on each side here. And then the double line of stitching to carry that look through. And our cartridges then end up being 23 inches here. So I'm going to start here, and the way I'm going to do this so that they're in line all the way across is this scribe line that's it's about 3/8 of an inch from the top is going to be where the first one goes, and then I just bring my square on here and I square my chisel against it. And there we go. And just like that, as I've said before, we're off like a herd of turtles. So I'm going to continue across here, and once this is done, then we'll need to lay out for our strap of leather that holds the cartridges themselves. This is the belt body. So I'll be back in just a little bit. All right, so that's the start of each, and I mean the start because I need to figure out now how many additional holes I need to add for that strap, but we'll figure that out here in just a second. So now, much like the belt, this is the cartridge strap, and now I need to create the pattern here for the stitching to create each one of those loops on this piece of leather. All right, so now on the cartridge strap part of this, I had figured 1¼ inches, but I decided to tighten that up just a little bit. So I'm going to go 1 3/16 of an inch between each of these rows. And then between these others is going to be the exact same space that we used on the belt strap. And I haven't changed my wing divider, so the pattern should be the same. Unlike the belt, these holes are going to be ran from hooking the top of this strap like this. So I don't have to worry about the reveal along here. I just need to get the spacing right on it. So there's a 1/2 inch more in each one of these patterns than on that. So a 1/2 inch times 20, that's 10 inches. So I'm going to need about 35 inches, and I've got plenty of leather here. So I don't need to start in the middle. I can just start here on one end with this pattern. So I'm just going to start here. Well, let's come in a little bit. Leave me a room to trim. I haven't figured out how I want to finish this yet. I think I'm going to do the same clip corner as the buckle has this clipped corner, and I think I'm just going to do a clip corner on this here as well. So we're going to start off with our distance between stitch lines, which is here, like that. And then I need to measure out 1 3/16. So distance between is 1 3/16. That's it. And we're just going to go from one end here to the other until I have 20 spots here. So there's 1 and 2 and 20. And I'm just going to cut it here. Get rid of some scrap. I'll figure out the shape here on the end when I'm done here. So now, much like on the belt strap, I need to do the same here. And I'm just going to use my square. Except for I'm going to hook that first one. It's going to be off the side here, but it's not making a hole. I'm just doing that to keep the spacing the same. Okay. Now I know here how many holes I'm going to need to add on my belt. What I mean by that is when I go here, so I'm going to have 2 more holes on here to create that or finish that pattern. All right, so now that I've got this portion created, I know how many holes I'm going to need for the belt. Because on here I have 7 holes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. On the cartridge strip. On the belt, it's going to be 1 more. 1 at the top and 1 at the bottom. So if there's 7 here and I have 2 more, it'll be 9. Let's go back over to this belt strip here. And on here, I have 6. So to get 9, I need 3 more. So I'll just overlap 3 here. And I can put the square on here if I feel like I need to. But if I've got 3 holes here, that should line this up. And I'll just need to go down through here doing the same. Now, if you lay this on here, you'll see that the first stitch is going to start on the belt, stitch us down, and it'll be stitched to there. So it'll be solidly stitched in on each one of those. So what I'm going to do is I'll go down through each one of these, overlap by 3, and finish out these. And you don't need to follow along while I do that. And once I have that done, then I'll come down through here And I'll do the same here. I extend this down by 2 and create another pattern on each one of these spots so that when I'm finished, I'll be able to stitch this together. So I'll get that done and I'll be right back. All right, so I finished all of my stitching holes here. This is the cartridge strip here. This is the belt strip here. And just to give you a little bit of a visual on how this is going to look, it's going to line up here. Let's say these stitch lines here. It's going to line up here. And then you'll have the top of a cartridge. There won't be a lot showing on the top of the cartridge, but it'll look about like that when it's done. And then the bottom, believe it or not, this is 1 5/8 inches. That other is 2.5 inches long. And the other cartridge is going to be, well, there's going to be about this much brass, and then the rest of it will be the projectile or the bullet, which will extend all the way down to here. So I think it's going to be a pretty cool look. And then this is going to be the thread that I'm going to use on the belt. This is beige in the Tiger Ritz 0.08 thread. And I'm going to hand stitch this on there. And I picked this color because this is supposed to look old, and that rifle series started in 1873, if I'm correct. And they wouldn't have been using a woven polyester thread. They probably would have been using sinew. And so I think this kind of replicates the color of sinew. So that's the thread I'm going to use. I'm going to go ahead and get started on creating these loops here. And when I get a ways down through here, then I'll come back. I'll probably do most of it in my lap. It seems like it works pretty well for me. And I'm going to end up doing a clipped corner, kind of like this buckle is a clipped corner. So I'm going to probably come off here at an angle and come down and across. And I'll probably add one more row of stitches out here and come out at an angle, and this leather will match that same deal. And I may come out here a 1/2 inch, or I may bring it in closer. I'll have to decide on that. Once I get all of the loops sewn, I'll come back also when we get ready to put our spots in here that kind of make it look like the spots are holding this strap on there. Appreciate having you along. I'll be back here in just a little bit. So as you can see, I've gotten down here towards the end. I've got my cartridge loops here formed up to these last 2, and I thought I'd bring you along here as I stitch these last 2 on. And I'm just doing what I've heard others refer to as a leapfrog style saddle stitch. First one and then the other. And if you always start on the front, it helps keep the stitches pretty uniform. The other thing, though, is when I wet form these loops for the cartridge, it's going to really pinch in on these stitch lines, and I don't think it's going to draw that much attention here. And when I get up here to the top, I will finish with both needles on the back side, and I will transition on the back side of the belt here to this row of stitches going the other direction. So there are those stitches. And then on the back here, I've been alternating, making an X to get this pattern here to the next row of stitches. So I'll get that here. Okay, so now that I arrived at the top, crossed over to on the back here to the next row of stitches, and I'm just going to leapfrog to the bottom. And when I get to the bottom here, then I will start another loop here, and it'll be the last loop. So I'll come back when I'm ready to figure out the shape here on the end. So next, to finish this cartridge strip, I went ahead and created a clipped point on the end of the strap that mirrors the clip point on the buckle that my client chose. And I'm just going to now do a stitch around here. On a belt that you pull through loops, I don't like flaps like this very much because a lot of times they want to get caught on the loops in your jeans or your pants. this isn't going to go over anything, so it's really not that big of an issue, but I wanted something that visually looked right. So I went ahead and measured the distance between these two, created another stitch line that way, and then I went ahead and tried to figure like a 45-degree angle on both sides, cut that, and I use a kind of a non-leather working tool, putty knife underneath here so that I'm not cutting into this leather. So now that I've got that done, I'm just going to go ahead and take the same color thread and I'm going to create a saddle stitch around this point on here, this clipped point, and I think that'll give a nice finish to this part of the belt. Once we get this sewn in, the next thing that we're going to have to do is going to be to put in all of these spots through here, and that's going to be a fun little project. I've never done a project where I had, and I call them spots. They're really a rivet, but they're just decorative. So if they're decorative in my book, they're a spot. But I've not done one where I've had so many of those spots. I've got, well, there's going to be 2 for every cartridge loop, and then there's more on each end. So there's going to be like just under 50 of these spots that I have to make holes for and to get set. Let me get this sewn on here, and then I'll reset up, and we'll be ready to make the holes and to install those spots. After that, unless I'm forgetting something, the next phase is going to be to laminate the second layer on this belt. And then after I get that laminated on there and the corners clipped, then I'll establish a stitch line all the way around this. And then I've got a couple hours worth of hand stitching to stitch this 2-layer part together. So I'll be right back here when I get set up here for this next part. So as you can see, I've finished all the stitching. I've got all the loops are formed. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to install these antique brass finished rivets. I just consider them a spot. It's got a hammer finish to the head on that. And what I did was I set my wing divider to this same reveal here, which is going to be what the same is on the bottom. This is the only reason why I picked that. And I'm going to go through here and I'm going to mark wherever one of these holes go. And I've already gotten started here, so I'm going to finish marking those, and then I'll come back and make a hole for each one of them, and then we'll come back and we'll set those spots in here. So give me just a minute to finish marking these, and I'll get set up. We'll poke these holes in here, and then we'll set these spots. All right, now I need to go through here with my drive punch and to create the hole for each one of these. All right, so now we're going to install all of these. Yeah, a large amount of these. And I'm going to start by pushing the post in from the back. And then put the cap on it here, and it kind of snaps in place. So I'm going to go ahead and do that from one end of the belt to the other, and then we're going to set these. And I am not going to set these in a way that most people would think is the right way to do it, but I'm going to explain why when I get to that point. So all the spots are installed now, and I just need to set each one of these. And obviously, normally I would turn this over onto a Pondo board because I find that the Pondo board doesn't deform this hammered rivet face. The problem with that, obviously, are these. And I thought about, do I set these before I do the stitching? And this just seemed like the easiest way. And I did test one with the setter on the front of it, and that's not a horrible look. I think it looks fine. It's flattened out some. But what I think I'm going to do is I've dug into my scrap wood, and I've come across a board here that's the same width. I've got it set in a vise over here. Let's take a look. So I've got a board that's the same thickness, roughly, as the space between these. So I'm just going to flip this over and set these from the back side. Let me set the first one here. And a lot of times I'll use this setter. I don't see any advantage to using this setter on here. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe there is. I'll just go ahead and do it. That's the way I've always done it. It's always worked. And let's take a look and see. Okay, yeah, that worked pretty good, and it didn't deform it. Let me see if I can dig it off of there. I don't know if it's set good enough or not. Yeah, I'm going to give it a little bit harder wrap. You can see it created 2 dimples in this soft wood, and that'll help me, I think, find that spot each time. I'm going to go back to my maul on that. I had thought about just striking the back with the hammer. Well, they look good. Yep. All right, it's go time. Oh, the wood's getting deformed. I may have to find some harder wood. Let me shift this over. Let's try again here. Yeah, it's working, but it's deforming the wood, and I'm afraid I won't get a consistent set. All right, so I got a little bit harder wood here, and let's see how this goes. I suppose if it deforms the spots, I can just go back through and do the rest of them so they match. I've had a couple people suggest that I buy a setter that attaches to the side of the bench for spots and snaps and such. I suppose they're right. I just kind of hate to attach and unattach equipment on a regular basis because I feel like if you don't have that equipment, readily available, if you have to install it or something, chances are you're just not going to do that. So, and I just, like anybody else, probably have a limited amount of edge space to mount items. Just kind of doing a visual first, make sure they all look like they're set, and they do. And I'll probably take a little time and just go through here and make sure they all feel set, before I go on. The thing is, these spots, they're not going to have any stress on them. The thread is going to do that, but I'd hate for one to pop off and be gone. So I'll just futz through here, and I'll be back in just a moment here, and we'll be ready to use contact adhesive and laminate these two, and then after that I'll be sewing the edges. Once I create my straps for my belt, buckle, and the adjustment end, then I'll be just about done here. So, but no kidding, there's a bunch of sewing along this edge yet. Okay, so we're ready now for the next step. The next step is going to be laminating my liner to my belt. And typically I laminate it with the smooth side of leather on both sides. Now, I've given this a lot of thought, and typically when I'm making a belt, the smooth side out on both sides is good because it gives you a finished edge or a finished surface on both sides. But this belt is wide enough, it's not going to go through loops, so the loops aren't going to help hold it in place. So I decided to put the flesh side, the rough side, rough out on the inside for the liner. So it's going to go together much like this. So the process is going to be the same. I just think that by having this on there, and this is going to have an oil finish on there, I think that that's going to make it stay in place better. So I'm going to go ahead, and so I don't get confused here and put contact adhesive on the wrong side, I'm going to go ahead and do the liner first so that I keep track of where I'm at in the process here. So I'll just brush on the two coats, and you've heard me probably say it. If you heard it once, you've probably heard it 100 times. 2 coats of contact adhesive. I allow it to set up between those 2 coats, and that'll give me the best possible adhesion. And we'll get down here a little bit further. I wasn't sure if I was going to talk about this feature I'm putting in here or not, but I think the owner's okay with me saying what's going to be in here. So I guess what will happen is if he doesn't want his friends to know, then he won't show them this video. But I'll explain when we get down there. It'll be here just in a moment. So here we're coming upon this feature I was talking about. I'm going to make, I've had a couple people inquire about a money belt, and I'm not going to say this is specifically a money belt, but this is going to have a hidden compartment to put money in. And so what I did is I laid out the pouch or slot on both pieces so that I don't get contact adhesive in the wrong place and make it non-functional. And I thought, at length, should I create a formal pouch in there? Didn't want to add a bunch more leather to it, and it wasn't because of the cost of the leather. It's just trying to keep it uniform. Plus, I thought it might telegraph through to the face of it if I did more. So I guess we'll see how this works. And once the gentleman ordered this, once he's had this for a while, I'll try to get some feedback from him on this and how it's working for him. So I made this strip across here is where the stitching is that'll hold the 2 layers together. And then from this hole down, and I put a hole in there so the leather wouldn't tear. That's one way to help, to make a corner or a stop area here on your leather, is to make a hole there. And it doesn't have to be as big as I use. That's just what I decided to use on it. And then I also cut a little relief of leather from it. And the reason why I did that is I was concerned, leather, especially if it's not, under tension, tends to either shrink or potentially even get bigger if the owner is to oil it. And I was afraid that what would happen is that the leather would get wider and then it wouldn't want to lay down properly. So I went ahead and just cut about 1/8 of an inch off of that edge there. I guess when we get this all assembled, I'll have to grab some folding money and stick in there. And obviously, coin I guess you could put it in there. It doesn't make much sense to me to put, you know, coin in there. But so same on here. I've laid out where those two layers aren't going to be glued together. And I'll apply up to there. And as long as I get these edges, ends lined up the way I have them cut, then this pocket should be in the right place. I guess the worst that can happen is it doesn't work and it just uses a regular belt. And I thought about making it even smaller. You could fold the money two ways. You know, I guess it just depends on, you know, how much you're wanting to store inside the money belt. If it's emergency funds, then obviously it doesn't need to be nearly as much. So I'll continue on here applying contact adhesive. I need 2 coats on these surfaces, and I'll come back when we're getting ready to laminate these two together. I really hate to do this. I'm going to break in here and make it a part 2 video for the rest of it. I do hate doing that because myself, I want to finish going into the rest of the project. But there's still quite a bit left to do to assemble this. And I think the detail is important, what we've got going so far. But stay tuned. Next week, I'll have the part 2 of this video. We'll tie this all together and it'll be worth the wait. I do appreciate you taking time to be with me on the video today. Please like, share, and subscribe. But more importantly, I do hope you have a great day.